Today's December 9th, 2024. My name is Maggie Johnson. I'm a member of the John Bartram chapter, Daughters of the American Revolution. This interview is being conducted for the Library of Congress Veterans History Project. In addition to the veteran present is Susan Bays, who is videotaping today. All right, Tom, tell us a little bit about you. Where were you born? Do you have siblings? Were they in the military as well?
I was born in April the 2nd, 1948 in Leavenworth, Kansas. My father was a steel worker. My mother was a stay-at-home mother. I have two sisters. The sister next to me is 2 years younger than me, and then there was a big gap where I have a sister that is 13 years younger than me. And then I have a brother, two brothers that are 15 and 17 years younger.
Okay. And did any of those follow in the military?
Both of my brothers actually they were commissioned officers as well. They did not make a career out of the military active duty, but my youngest brother, Pat, retired as a full colonel as well from the National Guard. So he served 30 years in the National Guard.
Oh, good for him. Excellent. So tell us a little bit about your time at the University of Kansas in the ROTC program.
Well, I mentioned my father earlier. He was a steel worker and he was a submariner in the Second World War. And I started college in 1966. That was the height of the Vietnam War. My father said, when you get into the university, go and join ROTC because the chances are you're probably going to get either drafted or have to serve in the military, and trust me, you want to go in as an officer, not as an enlisted soldier. Not that there's anything wrong with enlisted, but he said, I would highly encourage you to go in as a commissioned officer if you can. So he said, get into ROTC. And I went to the University of Kansas, started in September of '66, and enrolled in ROTC, Army ROTC. And 4 years later, I got commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Armor Branch.
Okay. Do you still keep in touch with any of your comrades from the university?
One of my very best friend is a retired lieutenant colonel. He and I have known each other since we were 16 years old in high school. He also went to the University of Kansas. He's retired, I just mentioned that, he's retired lieutenant colonel in the infantry. He did serve in Vietnam, and he resides in Mesa, Arizona. And I have several other friends. And about 3 blocks from here is one of my very good friends as well that served we were second lieutenants together in Bamberg, Germany in 1970 through 71, 72. And he's a retired armor officer as well, full colonel, aviator.
Oh, wow. Excellent. We're going to talk a little bit about your early days of service. After your stint as an ROTC, where'd you go? What'd you do?
Upon commissioning, I was married at the time. I got married my second semester junior year in college to my high school sweetheart, and we had a baby about 2 years later. When I graduated, we had our first son. I was commissioned in Armor Branch, as I told you, and I went to Fort Knox, Kentucky, which is the home of Armor Branch, for Armor Officer Basic Training. And from there, after I graduated about 6 weeks later out of that, I went to Fort Benning, Georgia for parachute school, airborne school, and became a parachutist. After that, I got my first assignment. It was supposed to be to Fort Hood and then on to Vietnam. But the assignment officer from the Pentagon came down and said, we're starting a new program, and if you sign, at the time I got commissioned, I had a 2-year obligation. I should have stated that earlier. He said, we're starting a new program that if you volunteer for an indefinite status of active duty, you can choose where you want to go. And I thought, well, that sounds interesting. I wasn't in any particular hurry to go to Vietnam, so I chose Germany. And I got an assignment to the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment in Bamberg, Germany, and stayed there for 3.5 years.
And what were your duties there in Germany?
I started out as a platoon leader in a cavalry troop and served in that capacity for about a year, maybe 2 years, and then I became the executive officer of that. And from there I moved over to the headquarters company and became the support platoon leader. Support platoon leader had the responsibility for about 50 soldiers. We carried all the ammunition for the squadron, carried all the fuel and supplies and stuff like that on trucks. And I did that job until about May, June of 1973, and then I left Germany after my first assignment and went to Fort Hood, Texas.
Any memories, good memories from Germany?
You know, Germany was really tough. I had a brand new baby. We spent, in the cavalry troop that I was in, we had the responsibility of patrolling the east-west German border. And so every 90 days I deployed for 30 days to the border, and as an officer in charge of one of the border camps, we sent daily patrols out, making sure that there was no crossing of the border from east to west or west to east, and it was a security type mission that we did. And on top of that, we also had to go to Grafenwehr, Germany to shoot tank gunnery. We had tanks. We had to go out in Hohenfels every winter for maneuver rights. So to answer your question, it was a tough assignment. I was gone over 200 days a year from my family, and I really didn't want to stay in the Army anymore. And my wife said, why don't you take one more tour and see what comes out of that? I know you're dissatisfied. It was really tough. I mean, here you are 22, 23, 24 years old with a brand new baby, and you're deployed, and I just didn't like it. It was hard work, it was long hours, and being deployed constantly really got on my nerves. So we took the next assignment, went to Fort Hood, Texas, and everything changed. I got fantastic jobs there. The first thing I got promoted to captain by then. So the first thing that I did is I became a company commander of the headquarters company in an armor battalion. And this was all tanks now instead of cavalry like I had in Germany. And from there I went to, after 2 years of serving in the tank battalion, I went up to the Corps headquarters and worked for my former boss, the Lieutenant Colonel. He was in operations up there, and I worked for him for a little bit. And then I heard that there was a cavalry troop opening in the divisional cavalry squadron that had not been filled yet. So I went and got on my best pressed Army fatigues and went down and saw the Lieutenant Colonel, did an interview with him, and he accepted me right there on the spot, and I went and commanded a cavalry troop. So that's my second command at that point. I had the headquarters company, now a cavalry troop. I left the cavalry troop a year later after commanding that, and there was an opening. My boss came to me and said, would you be interested in being an aide? I said, sure. And he said, okay, the commanding general, two-star general of the division, his aide was getting ready to leave and he was taking interviews. So I interviewed for that job and he selected me to be his aide-de-camp. So I was an aide-de-camp for a little over a year and a half, almost 2 years with him. And that was almost a total of 5 years at Fort Hood at that point. And that really changed my perspective on the Army. I had good jobs, good bosses, and I was progressing rapidly. So I really felt good about that.
What about your duties in the cavalry?
Well, I just mentioned that I had the two commands, and then the aide-de-camp job.
Okay. So specifically from day to day, you just were commanding troops, and anything that really stood out in your mind during those times?
No, the soldiers there, that was the time when drugs were pretty rampant when I was a lieutenant in Germany. A lot of hash, a lot of cocaine and heroin and stuff going on. You got to remember, these soldiers were drafted, went to Vietnam, came out of Vietnam hooked on drugs, and then they filled them back in Germany as filler troops. They had 6 months to serve, and that's the kind of soldiers that I got. That was another thing that I hated about the Army at the time. The soldiers were just always drugged out. Now at Fort Hood, things started to change because the Army cracked down on the drug policy. They started doing random urinalysis, and they changed the policy that if you're caught with a positive urinalysis, you're immediately discharged. So we cleaned up the Army, got rid of all the drugs out of the Army. Not all, but we got rid of the majority of the bad soldiers that were using drugs. And it was much more pleasant to command a group of people that wanted to be there.
Sure.
We also changed from a draft Army to an all-volunteer Army. And these soldiers that we now had were off of drugs, and they had volunteered to come in and serve on active duty. So they were much more pleasant to be in command of.
Right. So after Fort Hood, you went where?
After Fort Hood, the Army, my armor branch had a program set up with the infantry branch where they exchanged different officers to their advanced course, and I was selected to go to the infantry officers advanced course. So I spent 6 months at Fort Benning, Georgia, going to that. And unbeknownst to me at that time, I was in what they call a below the zone opportunity for promotion to major, and I didn't think anything of that. I wasn't eligible until another year to go in for promotion. So the promotion list came out, and they hung it up on a bulletin board, and I walked up and I went, oh my God, there was my name. And I was selected early, below the zone, to be a major, which bumped me ahead of all of my peers by at least a year. And I graduated from the infantry officers advanced course, and my assignment officer came down and said, well, you know what's next, the 3 R's, reserve component, recruiting, or ROTC, because those were jobs that needed to be filled. And I said, oh boy, I don't want to go in recruiting. I definitely don't want to go in recruiting. And he said, how about ROTC? I said, sure. So he said, what if we have an opportunity, believe it or not, the University of Kansas is starting, where I graduated, is starting an extension program in Emporia, and they need somebody to go down there and run the program. I said, that would be perfect. So I got to go back, and I became a professor of military science and created the ROTC program at Emporia State University and stayed there for 3 years.
Wow.
Now that was good for a lot of reasons. One, I was back in my home state. Two, I was close to my family, only 2 hours away back up to Leavenworth, so we could visit periodically. And three, I didn't have to go to the field. I wasn't out doing tank gunnery and away from my family. I got to really do a lot of things that fathers in the military don't get to do. Coached my son's baseball team, coached a soccer team, helped him with his paper route, did all those kind of neat things.
It's interesting you mentioned below the zone. I will assume that there will be young men and women who will be viewing videos like yours. Tell us a little bit about what below the zone means and how important it is for young people today.
Well, it's very rare because they do a very, very small percentage of the officers that are eligible to get promoted. And it's really a reward for what you have done in your career up to that point. So they're accelerating your career ahead of your peers, basically.
Right, exactly. So after your ROT stint in your home state, where did you go from there?
Well, I got selected to go to the Command General Staff College, and that was back at Fort Leavenworth, where I was born and raised. And I went to the class of 82, 83. That was 9 months of tough work, hard work, good studies, but a very, very professionally run organization. From there, I got the armor officer, my assignment officer from Armor Branch came down, as all branches do, midway through the course, and they talk about your follow-on assignment. So being a major, I was already promoted to major by then, and being a major, I needed to get back to, because I was in ROTC for 3 years, I wanted to get back to if I wanted to get to lieutenant colonel and command a battalion in Armor Branch, I needed to serve as a major in a ground unit someplace. So I was away in school for a year. I was teaching ROTC for 3 years. So I've been away from the Army, the real Army, out there running around in tanks and stuff for almost 4 years. So I needed to get back to that. He said, well, we have an opportunity for a program called Personnel Exchange Program, PEP. And I said, well, what is that? He said, well, we have countries all around the world that we exchange officers with, and we do it in the branch of Major. And I said, okay. He said, we have one coming available in the United Kingdom. And I said, okay, what does that entail? I said, well, we have the major that gets this job will go to a British tank squadron and command a British tank regiment and command a British tank squadron. Because in Great Britain, they use majors to command at the same level we use captains to command.
Oh, wow.
And I said, that'd be interesting. That'd be my third command. That'd be pretty cool. I asked him, what will this do to my career? Because I really need to get back to a ground. He said, this is fantastic. This is, you know, we got 20, 30 people vying to get into this job. They love that. So lo and behold, I got selected to go to the United Kingdom, to the 4th Royal Tank Regiment, and I became the C Squadron Commander of the 4th Royal Tank Regiment. I served in England for 12 months, and at that time, that unit, which was called British Army of the Rhine, they rotated over to Germany every 12 months or so, and then they would replace a unit that was in northern Germany. So after 12 months in Tidworth, England, I rotated with the unit to Osnabrück, Germany, which is in northern Germany, because the U.S. Army has their commands down in southern Germany, Bavaria. And I spent another 12 months in Osnabrück, Germany, in command of that.
So what do you think was most important and most vivid in your memories of being in the UK?
Just the opportunity to command foreign soldiers. Now, when you say foreign, it's not like they don't speak English,
Sure.
obviously. They were great. They were fantastic soldiers. They were hardworking soldiers. Of course, on the weekends, when we were in garrison or not out on deployment someplace, we were able to do pub hopping and socialize and stuff like that. Just being part of and being treated as, not as royalty, but being treated as a fellow officer. They didn't treat me any differently than they treated themselves. And they were good soldiers, good officers, good socialization. It was probably the best 2 years I had up to that point.
So at that point, what happened to you? Where'd you go?
Well, after Osnabrück in Germany, I left. Actually, we did a rotation to Canada. The British Army doesn't have a lot of. Great Britain itself does not have a lot of land where you can go out and run around with tanks and shoot tanks and stuff. When we shot tanks, we would go down to the coast, and the targets would be down by the ocean so that the rounds would go on out into the ocean. It's very densely populated in the United Kingdom, not like in the United States. The United States, you got tank gunnery ranges and stuff. In Germany, we had tank ranges. You go out and shoot the tanks, there's no problem. In England, it's a small island, and that's what we did. So they do a deployment to Canada for their big maneuvers, and I deployed with them on my last assignment with them to Canada, and we were out in the field for 30 days running around shooting tanks and maneuvering and stuff like that. I left there and came back to the United States on my next assignment. And next assignment was back to Fort Leavenworth, where I became an instructor in the Combined Arms Staff School. I taught that for 1 year, got selected. I was already on the promotion list before I left to Lieutenant Colonel, waiting to see if I was going to get selected to be a battalion commander. And that first year of eligibility, I got selected to be a battalion commander. So after a year of teaching, I left there and went back to Fort Hood and commanded the 1st Battalion, 8th Cavalry for 2 years.
You certainly did a lot of schooling.
I did.
Is there any one particular school that stands out that you prefer more than the others?
Yeah, I'll tell you. I'll just give it to you in sequence. And it's after 2 years of battalion command. The next thing that you want to do is get selected for the Army War College. I got selected for the Army War College. I left I went back to Fort Leavenworth for 1 year to teach again, and then I got selected for the Army War College and went to Carlisle Barracks, Pennsylvania, which is the highest military schooling that the Department of Defense has. And it's equivalent to another master's degree. Oh, I forgot to tell you, when I was teaching ROTC at Emporia State University, on my own time as well, I earned a master's degree in political science. So that was beneficial personally to me to have that. So the equivalency of 9 months in Carlisle Barracks with the international studies that we did, it's really it's the highest level of schooling that the Department of Defense has to go to either one of either the Army, Air Force, Marine Corps. They all have their own graduate school like that.
Exactly. How long were you in Canada? How long was that?
It was a 30-day deployment when we were up there.
Okay. And that one was tied to your school, or?
No, that was with the British Army.
Oh, okay.
When we deployed there.
And what were your duties there?
Well, I was still a major commanding the tank squadron at the time.
Okay. Good. Okay.
From the Army War College, then I was on a promotion list to full colonel, and I went back to Fort Leavenworth and ran a program back there for a while, and then I got my promotion to full colonel, and I was waiting for my next assignment. The job that I had there was it was called the School for Command Preparation. We had all of the lieutenant colonels and colonels that are going into command came through this school that I ran. It's kind of a re-greening them school, if you will, because a lot of them had been away from military. So we're going to back up to date on the latest doctrine, latest techniques, tactics, and stuff like that. Okay. So I had a bunch of lieutenant colonels and majors that worked directly for me that taught this stuff to them. And then we use also computer simulation models to do Army battles and things like that to get them back up to speed. During that program, I also had the opportunity once a month, while these officers are in there getting groomed back up, all of the major officers from the Pentagon came out to Fort Leavenworth to talk to them. The Secretary of Defense, the Chief of Staff of the Army, all of the high-level 3 and 4-star generals came out and talked to this class. And there was about, I think we had like about 80 or 90 in each class come through. And this was once a month we would run this course. Gordon Sullivan, General Gordon Sullivan, was the Chief of Staff of the Army at the time. Oddly enough, he had been the commander of the 1st Infantry Division at Fort Riley, Kansas, and then he came there as a lieutenant, as a commanding general at Fort Leavenworth, and his son and my son were in high school together there. So I didn't know him personally, but I knew who he was, and he knew who I was because of the sons' relationships. And once a month he would come out as well from the Pentagon to speak to these officers. And he always liked to go down to the bookstore and look around while he was at Bell Hall at Fort Leavenworth. And I'd go down and meet him at the office and take him around, and I'd brief him. I'd say, sir, we have 65 officers in this class. Mostly, here's the branch layout, and we have so many females, etc. Just give him a little biographical sketch of what he was going to face when he got there. So as we were walking along one day, he said, Tom, I've got a job in Carlisle Barracks that needs to be filled by a full colonel. Would you be interested? And I said, well, it depends. What is it? And he said, I have a job there for the colonel that runs, it's called the Strategic Outreach Program. I said, okay, what is that, sir? He said, at Carlisle Barracks, we get professors, we get scientists, we get active military, etc. together, and they have a meeting and they do about a week's worth of discussion on a topic that interests me. So I said, sure. So I took that assignment and moved back to Carlisle Barracks and worked directly for General Sullivan for a year.
Of all of your tours of duty, and what was the most exciting for you? The one that kind of stands out in your mind that you really, really did enjoy?
Boy, there's so many. Obviously, the pleasure of being selected command at a battalion level was probably my greatest reward. I had 600 soldiers and about $5 billion worth of property and equipment that I was in charge of, and an annual budget of over $1 million and some dollars that I had to manage. And this was real money. This wasn't fake money. I mean, you had to sit down and work with your logistics officers and things like that, because replacing stuff on tanks is extremely expensive. You had to be careful on what you did. Plus, we were charged for ammunition and other things. It wasn't just, this is all free. No, you have to manage it and manage it correctly. It was a big responsibility.
What was the hardest part of your tours of duty, and how did you handle all of that?
Well, I think I mentioned earlier the hardest part was my early years as a young lieutenant serving in Germany, being gone so much. And that was very distasteful. That, along with the fact that the soldiers were not the kind of soldiers that I wanted to be in charge of.
Do you feel like today's service is a lot different from when it was during your time?
You know, actually, I think from what I read and study and see, these guys today are phenomenal. They go through deployment after deployment after deployment. If you look back at our recent history of Iraq, Afghanistan, Kuwait, all of the deployment that these soldiers go through, I'm just amazed that the Army is so vibrant and does as well as they do.
Yeah, that's good. Are there any of your instructors that stand out in your mind?
No, not specifically. No, I had good bosses. I had bad bosses, but that's going to happen in any business.
Oh, absolutely. All right.
But I will say, though, that as an aside to that, the camaraderie that I have had with fellow officers both in the United States and in Great Britain was fantastic. We had really, my almost 30 years, I was 26 years, 2 months and 1 day of service. I served with some of the finest people I've ever known.
That's excellent. Having said that, do you recall the day that you retired?
Oh, yeah.
You ended service. Tell us about that.
You know, I had stood in so many formations for ceremonies for people retiring, and I understand, I get it, that they want to honor you. But I just told my wife, I said, you know what? I don't want these guys out there standing in the hot sun for me to walk up and get a medal for serving all that time and work. I said, I just want to go out quietly. And so I told my boss, who was a 3-star general at the time at Fort Leavenworth, I said, sir, I really don't want to go through a ceremony. He said, fine, but you're gonna come up to my office and get a medal and retire. So I did.
And where was that? You retired out of what?
I retired out of Fort Leavenworth.
Oh, okay.
And Connie and I stayed in Fort Leavenworth for 12 years before we came to the villages. And we've been here for 17 now.
And what did you do after retirement, those 12 years?
Well, the first year I did nothing. I just enjoyed being retired. We did all kinds of stuff. We would get up, we'd go out for, things that you couldn't do while you were in the Army, while you were working up every day. I can't tell you how many, for the majority of my life, from the time I was 24 years old when I graduated or 22 years old when I graduated from college, I was probably up every morning at 4:45 to be in someplace for PT at 6 o'clock and work till 7, 8 o'clock, not 7, 8 o'clock, but work till 6:30, 7 o'clock every day, plus the deployments I talked about and being gone. So I said, I'm not going to do anything for the first year. And I had a bunch of civilian contractors that were in and around Leavenworth that wanted me to come and work for them. based on my experience and things that I had done. They said, we'll give you a great job, da 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 da. And I said, you know, I appreciate it, but I don't want to do it. And after a while, I told Connie, I said, you know, I probably ought to do something, because maybe in the future I'm going to want to go back to work. And I was only 46 at the time. I may want to go back and do something, and if I keep telling these guys no, they're going to stop asking. So I went to one of my old bosses and I said, hey sir, what can you do for me? He said, we can hire you part-time 3 days a week. And I said, great, that would be just perfect. So I went in and I was working with them doing computer simulations and modeling again. That was a field that I had acquired while I was working in the Army, besides being a tank guy and all that stuff. And I worked for them for 3 days a week and did programs. We did some training at Fort Leavenworth for some National Guard units and some of the officers up there. I did that for a while. After that, my brother, my oldest of the two brothers, came back from Texas, and he wanted to start up a business and with my younger brother. Well, my younger brother's wife said, you're not moving, we're staying in Texas. You're not going back to Leavenworth. So I said, okay, I'll help you out. And we started a business called MAH00121, and that was the first name of his wife was Mara and my wife was Connie. So we put the two wives' names together and came up with MAH00121, and we started a home refurbishing project. We would go out and buy houses, completely gut them, refurbish them, and sell them, flip them and sell them. So we did that for about 5 years until the housing market started looking a little weird, and that's when I decided to move to Florida.
How do you think the time that you served, did it change you in any way, either for the good or in any way at all?
Well, I think it developed me. I wouldn't be who I am today had I not served in the Army for all that time. I would have been totally different. I always had an aspiration to go to law school, and I even considered it when I retired. I thought, you know, I'm 46, should I go to law school? It had been another 3 years and that kind of stuff. I don't know, I could have still been practicing law today if I'd have gone, but I didn't.
Exactly. Of everything that you did during your service, I know we touched a little bit on what were some of the good points. What do you feel like was the best time that you served during your time?
I'd have to lump that in probably a couple of categories. One, I mentioned the time that I got to spend with my family in Emporia when I was teaching and running the ROTC program. That wasn't militarily, professionally good, but it was good for me and my family, good. The second would be the opportunity to command so many soldiers as a lieutenant colonel and the responsibilities that I had for commanding that battalion. Now, I'll just add a caveat to that. When I changed command and turned over my battalion, the 600 soldiers and all the tanks and equipment that I had to go to the Army War College, that next year, guess what happened? They went to Kuwait. So all of that time that I had spent training up to be I didn't go to Vietnam, but those soldiers that I trained, those captains that I worked with and supervised for those 2 years that I was a commander, they went to war, and they ran in the invasion, the big invasion that went across against the Iraqis, and they didn't lose one soldier.
Wow, that's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Mm-hmm. If you had anything to say to men and women that are going into the military today, what would you tell them?
Study hard, work hard, take care of your soldiers.
And you feel like the military changed you for the good. How did your family, how did they do during that time? You did a lot of different deployments during that time.
Well, you know, they call them Army brats for a reason. They're spoiled. But my two are well developed. and they are both very successful today. Both of them are graduates from the University of Kansas, my school. Both of them are in the same fraternity that I was in when I went to school there. And all the money and heartache that it cost me to get and put them through school for those 4 years that they did it, they are well-rounded because I think in part because of what they had to endure as they were young boys growing up. That I can't tell you how many different schools they went through. One year we went through like 3 different schools, in and out, moving from Fort Hood to Fort Benning, and then back to Fort Leavenworth. That's 3 different states that they lived in 1 year, 3 different schools. So they, I'm very proud of both of them.
That's great. What do you wish that people knew about the military and about veterans in general?
Just how much time that they spend away from their family, the appreciation of what they do, the call of duty. You know, people take it lightly that you say, you will go to war, you will sacrifice your life if you have to for this country.
Exactly. How do you feel about the military today? Do you feel like it's progressing or has gotten better than your time?
You know, as I mentioned earlier, these soldiers today, and sailors and Marines and airmen, they're all on multiple deployments all the time. It's a much smaller military force. When I went on active duty in 1970, there was 1.2 million in the Army itself. That was a big Army. Mostly because the war in Vietnam was still going on. And then as I served through my 26 years, we started downgrading because we didn't need that many people. And the Department of Defense didn't have to have that many across the board. So it's a much smaller force than what we had back in the 70s. And the commitments to me seem like they're just as much or more. We've got people that have to serve in Korea. We got people serving in Germany. We had people in Afghanistan and Iraq and all over the, all over the place. There are soldiers deployed today all over the world still that most American citizens don't think about.
Wow. Or probably don't even know.
Don't even know that we've got deployment. I mean, they're out there on the front lines doing what they have to do to be prepared to protect this country.
So all in all, you believe that you are a better person for having joined the military and achieved all that you have achieved during your time?
I'd say so, yes.
Good. Well, we thank you so much for your service. It's been such a pleasure today listening to your story. It seems like it was a quick one, even though it was quite a few years and a lot of different places that you were transferred to, but it sounded like it was a lot of good memories.
It was.
Good. Again, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you.